In 1983, Styx was the first band in history to have 4 consecutive multi-platinum albums certified by the RIAA. 4 in a row. The Grand Illusion, Pieces of 8, Cornerstone, Paradise Theatre, each one bigger than the last. Each one selling millions of copies to an audience that had been built slowly, carefully, over a decade of relentless work. They were from Chicago's South Side, not California, not New York, not anywhere the industry expected a band of that size to come from. And for a stretch of years in the late 1970s and early 1980s, they were arguably the biggest rock band in America. Then, Dennis DeYoung had an idea. The idea was for a concept album, a rock opera, a dystopian story about a future where rock music had been banned by a fascist government, told through a theatrical film that would open every concert, with the band picking up the story live on stage the moment the screen went dark. The other members had reservations. Tommy Shaw had serious reservations. DeYoung pushed it through anyway. The album was called Kilroy Was Here. The song everyone remembers from it is called Mr. Roboto, and within 12 months of its release, one of the most successful rock bands in America had stopped existing. Not because the album failed commercially. It didn't. It went platinum. It failed at something harder to measure and more expensive to lose. It failed the band itself. It broke something between 5 men who had spent a decade building something together, and that thing, once broken, did not go back together. Not fully, not ever. This is that story. Part 1. Southside, Chicago. The beginning is not glamorous. It rarely is. Dennis DeYoung grew up on the south side of Chicago. His neighbors were Chuck and John Panozzo, twin brothers born the same day, inseparable in the way that twins sometimes are, finishing each other's rhythms the way other people finish each other's sentences. Chuck played bass, John played drums, Dennis played keyboards. They started playing together as teenagers. The band went through names the way young bands do, the Trade Winds, then TW4, before eventually landing on Styx, the river from Greek mythology that runs through the underworld. It was a name with a certain dramatic weight to it. That turned out to be appropriate. James Young joined. Young was a guitarist with a raw, direct approach, the kind of player who believed that rock music was physical first and conceptual second. He and DeYoung were different people with different instincts, and that tension between Young's straightforward rock sensibility and DeYoung's theatrical ambition was present from the beginning. It just took years for anyone to feel it fully. The band signed with Wooden Nickel Records in 1972. They released 4 albums. They were regional. They were working. They were not famous. Then, in 1973, something happened that changed the timeline. A song called Lady, written by Dennis DeYoung, spent 2 years quietly building on radio after its release, the kind of slow accumulation that happens when a song is genuinely good and radio programmers keep coming back to it. By 1975, it was a top 10 hit, a power ballad, lush, emotional, the kind of song that a certain kind of listener puts on and does not turn off. Lady was the proof of concept that got Styx signed to A&M Records, a major label, a real one. And just as that deal was being completed, guitarist John Kurolowski left the band to return to his family, abruptly just before a tour. The band was desperate. Their road manager recommended a young guitarist from Alabama named Tommy Shaw. Tommy Shaw drove up to Chicago, plugged in and played. The band knew immediately. Tommy Shaw was 22 years old when he joined Styx in 1975. He was lean and quick, and he had the kind of vocal range that made harmonies possible that would not have been possible before. His guitar playing was different from Young's, more melodic, more inclined toward the lyrical, less interested in sheer volume than in the architecture of a solo. Where Young tended to attack, Shaw tended to build. Together, the three of them, Young on keys and lead vocals, Young on guitar, Shaw on guitar and vocals, formed a creative triangle that was more volatile and more productive than any two of them could have been alone. The Grand Illusion arrived in 1977. It is the album where Styx stopped being a regional act and became something national, then international. Come Sail Away, Young's composition and Young's voice pushed into the top 10 and stayed. Fooling Yourself, written by Shaw, became an anthem. The album went triple platinum. Then came Pieces of 8 in 1978 and Cornerstone in 1979, which contained Babe, another Young ballad, another #1, soft and orchestral, and precisely calibrated for the kind of radio that reached the widest possible audience. Shaw's contribution to Cornerstone included Borrowed Time and others, but it was Young's Babe that got the airplay and topped the chart. And if you were Tommy Shaw, watching from the inside, you were watching the math accumulate in a particular direction. Young wrote the hits. Young sang the hits. The hits were increasingly ballads, soft, theatrical, emotionally expansive pieces that were a long way from the hard-edged rock that Young and Shaw privately preferred. As long as the albums kept selling, the difference was manageable. You negotiate these things in a functioning band. You give ground here, you push back there. You find the arrangement that keeps everyone inside the room. What you hope is that no single decision becomes the decision that ends the negotiation permanently. Part 3. Paradise Theatre. In 1981, Dennis DeYoung had an idea. He wanted to build an album around the story of Chicago's Paradise Theatre, a grand old movie palace built in the 1920s, shuttered 30 years later, left to decay. DeYoung saw in it a metaphor for America itself, a country that had once been grand, that had seen its best years, and that was now quietly falling apart while pretending otherwise. It was a concept album. Shaw and Young had reservations. Concept albums were risky. Kiss had just released Music from the Elder, a concept album that had been a commercial disaster and had nearly ended their career. The memory was fresh, but Paradise Theatre worked. It did more than work, it hit #1 on the Billboard album chart, the only #1 album of Styx's career. The Best of Times, written and sung by DeYoung, went to #3. Too Much Time on My Hands, written and sung by Shaw, went to #9, the only top 10 single Shaw would ever have as a member of the band. Both of them had songs on the album. Both of them had songs on the radio. It was the most balanced the creative partnership had ever been, or would ever be. And then, flush with that success, with the #1 album, the sold-out arenas, and the 4 consecutive multi-platinum records, DeYoung had another idea. Part 4. The Idea. The Idea was another concept album, a rock opera this time, a full theatrical production. The story is a dystopian future in which a fascist government led by a televangelist named Dr. Everett Righteous has outlawed rock music. The hero is a former rock star named Robert Orrin Charles Kilroy, initials ROCK, who escapes from prison disguised inside a robot shell and connects with a young musician fighting to bring rock back. Every show would open with a 10-minute film telling the story. The band would be in the film as characters. When the film ended, the concert would begin. The actors on screen would become the musicians on stage, the narrative picked up live. DeYoung was the primary architect of all of it. He conceived the story. He wrote the screenplay for the film. He wrote most of the music. He had the vision fully formed in his head, and he drove it forward with the energy of someone who genuinely believed in what he was building. Shaw and Young did not share that belief. They had concerns about concept albums after the Kiss disaster. They had concerns about the theatrical direction, about whether a film opening and a robot storyline was the appropriate next step for a hard rock band that had just hit #1. They said so. DeYoung had more songwriting credits. DeYoung had written 7 of the band's 8 top 10 singles. DeYoung was, in the language of creative power, in a position to insist. He insisted. Later, he would acknowledge it himself on the Behind the Music episode about Styx. I have many times bemoaned the fact that I, through my sheer will, dragged the group into that. Sheer will. His words. The band went into the studio, for Kilroy was here with Young and Shaw present, but not fully committed. They contributed songs. Shaw wrote 3, Young wrote 2, DeYoung wrote 3, plus a reprise. But the album as a whole belonged to DeYoung's vision in a way that Paradise Theatre, for all its DeYoungness, had not. And then came Mr. Roboto. Part 5, Mr. Roboto. The song was never supposed to be a single. DeYoung wrote it as a transitional piece, the moment in the live show when the film ended and the concert began, when Kilroy tears off the robot mask and the story continues on stage. It was a functional piece of music written to serve the theatrical machinery of the production. The lyrics are partly in Japanese. The chorus is a Japanese phrase, "Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto," which means, "Thank you very much." The verses tell the story from inside the robot shell. Kilroy explains his escape in the first person. The production is synth-heavy and mechanistic, the sound of a band deliberately making itself sound like machinery. James Young later said, "This thing is targeted at 7-year-olds." A&M Records did test marketing. They played the song to focus groups. The focus groups loved it. The record company chose it as the lead single. Mr. Roboto went to #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Kilroy Was Here, the album, went to #3 on the Billboard 200 and went platinum. DeYoung had been right that the audience would respond to it, at least in the immediate commercial sense. But Bob Pittman, the co-founder and chief executive officer of MTV, watched the music video, with DeYoung as Kilroy and a troupe of sinister dancing robots, and said publicly what a significant portion of the rock audience was feeling privately. That song, Mr. Roboto, it killed Styx. It was truly awful. The first time we saw that video on MTV, it took your breath away. It was like, oh my God, they're doing what? Styx was a pretty cool group until that moment. James Young agreed, at least about the damage. He later said the song alienated half their audience. The tour that followed was its own disaster in the early going. DeYoung had envisioned an intimate theatrical experience, the film, the story, the production, and had booked theatre-sized venues to match that vision. What Styx had was an arena-sized audience who had bought tickets expecting an arena show. The early tour dates lost money. When the production eventually moved to arenas, there was a different problem, opening for harder-edged acts. The theatrical robot and film Kilroy show was received with a hostility that sometimes manifested as booing. DeYoung later said it himself. "I know what's wrong with Kilroy was here as an album. There's not enough rock and roll on it. For an album that's about banning rock and roll, you might want to have some." He was not wrong. He was just too late. Part 6. The Breaking Point. Somewhere on that 1983 tour, Tommy Shaw made a decision. The relationship between Shaw and DeYoung had been under pressure for years. Shaw was a rock guitarist who liked his music direct and physical. DeYoung was a theatrical keyboardist who liked his music expansive and conceptual. For years, the tension between those two orientations had produced something genuinely good, albums that had both the rock edge and the melodic depth, the best of times and Too Much Time on My Hands existing on the same record, without contradiction. Kilroy Was Here resolved the tension by eliminating it. It was DeYoung's album, DeYoung's vision, executed over Shaw's objections. And whatever Shaw had been willing to accommodate before, he was not willing to accommodate this. Kilroy was the point of no return. At the end of the Kilroy Was Here tour in 1983, Tommy Shaw quit. He wanted to pursue a solo career. He had his own music in him, harder, more direct, less theatrical, and the space to make it did not exist inside a band that had just spent a year on the road with a robot concept album. When Shaw left, the remaining members, James Young, Chuck Panozzo, and John Panozzo, wanted to replace him and continue. They brought this to DeYoung. DeYoung refused. He said Shaw was irreplaceable. Later, on Facebook, he reflected on that decision. The biggest problem was Tommy quit to pursue a solo career right after the tour. And when I refused against JY and Chuck and John Panozzo's wishes to replace him, Roboto lingered for 6 years as the last song remembered. Would it have been better if I had replaced Tommy in 1984? You tell me. I still don't think so. And so Styx dissolved. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with a press conference. The men went to their separate corners, and the band that had produced 4 consecutive multi-platinum albums simply stopped. Mr. Roboto, a song that was never supposed to be a single, a song that James Young refused to play live, a song that the chief executive officer of MTV described publicly as the moment Styx stopped being a cool band, was the last thing most people would hear from the classic lineup for 6 years. Part 7. The reunion that almost held. Styx came back in 1990, not with Shaw. He was committed to Damn Yankees by then, with Glenn Burtnick filling in on guitar and DeYoung back at the center. They released Edge of the Century. It contained a ballad called Show Me the Way, which reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed in the top 40 for 23 weeks. DeYoung still had the gift. He could still write the song that found its way to the widest possible audience. Shaw returned in 1996. The Return to Paradise tour was successful enough to go gold. The band was functional again. 5 men who had built something remarkable were back on stage together, performing the songs that had made them. But underneath it, the fault line was still there. The question of who Styx was, a hard rock band with theatrical elements or a theatrical production with rock elements, had never been resolved. It had only been paused. And then, in 1998, Dennis DeYoung got sick. What started as what seemed like a severe flu left him with extreme sensitivity to light and fatigue that made performing impossible. He asked his bandmates for 6 months to recover. Shaw and Young gave him a different answer. They went on tour without him, with Canadian singer Lawrence Gowan taking DeYoung's place under the name Styx. They did so without compensating DeYoung for the use of the name and without waiting the 6 months he had asked for. DeYoung sued. The suit was eventually settled, but the hard feelings were not. In 1999, Styx formally removed Dennis DeYoung from the band, the man who had written 7 of the band's 8 top 10 singles, the man who had written Come Sail Away, Babe, The Best of Times, Show Me the Way, the man who had been playing with Chuck and John Panozzo since they were teenagers on the south side of Chicago. Gone. Part 8. The irony that followed. Here is the thing about Mr. Roboto. The song that Shaw and Young spent years refusing to perform, that Young called targeted at 7-year-olds, and that the founder of MTV said was the moment Styx died, became in the years after DeYoung's firing one of the most recognizable pieces of music the band had ever produced. A Volkswagen commercial in 1998 featured the song and sent it back into popular consciousness. It appeared in films and television shows, and it was referenced at the Academy Awards. A new generation encountered it without any of the context, without the robot costumes, without the theatrical tour, without the behind-the-scenes war it had caused, and they simply found it catchy, strange, and unforgettable. By 2018, Styx was playing Mr. Roboto in their encore. 35 years of refusing. 35 years of James Young saying the song had alienated their audience, damaged their credibility, and cost them Tommy Shaw. And then they played it in the encore. DeYoung, for his part, went to Facebook to note that they were playing it in the encore, of all places, with the particular energy of a man who has been told he was wrong for decades and who had finally been given the smallest possible confirmation that he was not entirely wrong. James Young, in a Billboard interview around that time, was careful to clarify that the version they were playing had been rearranged to be more palatable, as if the problem with the song had ever been the arrangement. DeYoung said around the same time that there are 3 things you never discuss at Thanksgiving dinner with Styx fans: religion, politics, and Kilroy was here. He said it like a joke. It is not entirely a joke. Part 9. What the argument was really about the story of Styx and Kilroy was here as easy to tell as a story about one bad album, one bad decision, one song that went too far. That's not quite what it was. What it was, underneath the robots and the rock opera and the Billboard chart positions, was a conversation that never got finished, about what kind of band Styx wanted to be, who got to make that decision, and what happened when one man's creative vision outran the collective agreement of the people around him. Dennis DeYoung was not wrong that Kilroy was here, was ambitious. He was not wrong that Mr. Roboto was different. He was not entirely wrong that different was worth trying. The album went platinum. The song went top 3. But he was wrong to believe that commercial success and creative unity were the same thing. A band can sell 1 million copies of a record that 2 of its members fundamentally disagreed with making. The sales do not resolve the disagreement, they just postpone it. What Tommy Shaw knew, sitting in that theatre in 1983 watching a film about robot guards and band rock music, was that this was not the band he had joined, that the space for his music, for Blue Collar Man, for Too Much Time on My Hands, for the harder-edged Shaw songs that kept the Styx catalogue from being entirely D. Young's, was getting smaller, album by album, vision by vision. He left, not because of Mr. Roboto the song, because of what Mr. Roboto the song represented, a creative process in which his input was present but not determinative, where his objections were heard and then overridden by someone with more chart success and more sheer will. James Young said it cleanly, looking back. Dennis had this vision for an idea that none of the rest of us agreed with, and we battled about it for quite some time. They battled. DeYoung won the battle, and losing won the war. The Styx that exists today, touring, releasing albums, performing on stages across America, does not include Dennis DeYoung. It includes Tommy Shaw and James Young, alongside members who were not part of the classic lineup. Lawrence Gowan, who replaced DeYoung in 1999, has been with them now longer than DeYoung was in the band's peak years. Todd Sucherman has played drums since John Panozzo died in 1996. DeYoung tours separately, performing the Styx catalogue under his own name, doing the songs that he wrote. Come Sail Away, Babe, the best of times, to audiences who want to hear them from the man who wrote them. Chuck Panozzo, the bass player, who has been there since the south side of Chicago in the 1960s, said something that stays with you. He said, "Before any more of us die, I would hope that it could happen. Every year that it does not happen is another year that goes by. And if you wait too long, who will care?" That was not a recent quote. The years keep passing. What they made in the years when all of it was working, when DeYoung's theatrical ambition and Shaw's rock directness, and Young's guitar and the Panozzo twins holding the bottom together, all coexisted inside the same band, was genuinely remarkable. Come Sail Away is still one of the great arena rock songs. Renegade still sounds like a stadium full of people singing in unison. The Best of Times is exactly what it claims to be, the best version of a certain kind of melodic rock ballad, built for a certain kind of moment in a certain kind of life. Those songs are still there. They play on classic rock radio in cities all over the country. They come up in shuffle playlists and car stereos, and the moments when someone hears the opening notes and says, "I know this one." The band that made them does not exist anymore. It stopped existing in the most important sense the day Dennis DeYoung walked into the studio with a robot costume and a concept album, and enough sheer will to make everyone else go along with it. Mr. Roboto reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It cost more than it earned.